So I want to give you the answers today. When you're in ministry, I talk to ministers all the time. I talk to pastors. I talk to others in church ministry that are dealing with this in their churches, and they're dealing with this in their families. And so I want you to have the right answers, the answers that are based on science and the answers that are based on the Bible as well. I performed about 30,000 general anesthetics, and about 12 years ago, I and many of my medical colleagues began noticing that we were seeing many people having much more difficulty staying sedated. We saw that they were fighting us literally during sedations, and we were using 3 to 4 times the normal amount of propofol, the general anesthetic that we normally use, and they were still fighting us. And we eventually found through studies that this was happening almost exclusively in patients who use marijuana. And the more they used, the worse the problem was. But I haven't just seen this in my patients. I've seen this in my family and in my friends. I have 3 cousins that I have absolutely no doubt would be here today if not for marijuana. Another young man who's a very close family member of mine was headed in the right direction. He went to a Christian school, and he graduated from high school and went to college in College Station with a young man that he had grown up with, and they had gone to church together. And they got in with a group of guys who were smoking marijuana, and they thought, hey, everybody's doing this. Everybody seems to be okay, so why not? So they did it as well. The second time they did this young man had a severe psychotic episode, and he wound up in a psychiatric facility. And he was never able to return to school. And those are just a few of the many stories I could tell you of people I know and love who have had their lives damaged and even destroyed by marijuana. And so this led me to investigate the subject. And what I found really shocked me. I found that there is so much evidence that shows that marijuana is dangerous. I have over 500 peer-reviewed studies in each of my books, and I could have put many more in there, but the evidence is absolutely overwhelming. The science and the biblical evidence is overwhelming. And despite this overwhelming evidence, the use of marijuana has risen rapidly over the past couple of decades. In 2010, 7% of Americans had used marijuana in the past year. By 2022, that was 22%. So in only 12 years, the use of marijuana more than tripled. Today, 43% of 19 to 30-year-olds have used in the past year. 31% of 12th graders and even 7% of 8th graders, think about that, have used in the past year. And for the first time ever, more Americans are using marijuana each day than are using alcohol. And 40% of marijuana users use on a daily or almost daily basis, which is a pattern that's more similar to nicotine than it is to alcohol. In the 90s, marijuana use was seen as negative for the vast majority of people. 80% of young people at that point believed that marijuana was dangerous. Today, it's flipped. Only 20% of young people believe that marijuana is dangerous at this point. So how did that radical change happen in such a short period? Well, from a spiritual standpoint and knowing the spiritual destruction that this causes, I would have to say that it's demonic. But if we put that aside, we have to say follow the money. This is a huge industry. It's a $130 billion a year industry. And that's a conservative estimate. It's actually probably bigger than that. And the co-author of my upcoming book is a retired state representative, and she has great insight into the power and the money behind this industry. THC is the main mind-altering chemical in marijuana, and it affects brain function in many ways. It works through something called a cannabinoid receptor or a CB receptor, but eventually it leads to an increase in dopamine. And dopamine is known as the pleasure chemical of the body. And this dopamine release leads to decreased production of dopamine, and it leads to reduced sensitivity to dopamine as well. And so eventually the body needs marijuana just to keep its normal amount of dopamine. And it's always struggling. It never really gets quite enough dopamine after you've been using for a while. And really, it doesn't take very long for that to happen. And so without that extra stimulation of dopamine, there's less pleasure, there's less motivation, there's less concentration. And so this helps account for marijuana's addictive properties. And it also helps account for many of the mental health issues that are caused by marijuana as well. And THC leads to impairment. Unfortunately, there were about 10,000 fatal auto accidents last year that can be directly attributed to THC or to marijuana. And that's 20% of all fatal auto accidents. Marijuana today is not your grandparents' marijuana. At Woodstock in 1969, the average THC percent, which we would call the potency, was 1% to 2%. The really good stuff, if you want to call it that, was 3%. Today, according to the CDC, that figure is 22 to 26%, with some strains topping 45% and concentrates over 90%. There's some concentrates now that are up to 99% THC. And this higher potency marijuana has led to a completely new understanding of marijuana addiction. The old low potency marijuana it caused psychological addiction. But today's high potency marijuana causes true physical addiction, like many other drugs that we know of. And according to the CDC, 30% of marijuana users suffer from addiction, and that's called cannabis use disorder. The National Institute on Drug Abuse says that 50% of daily users become addicted. And high potency marijuana, anything over 10%, carries a 4 to 5 times risk of addiction. And the likelihood of addiction increases considerably for those who start early and for those who use more frequently. 46% of all marijuana users between the ages of 12 and 17 have cannabis use disorder. They're addicted. That's 1.35 million young people ages 12 to 17 in America that are addicted to marijuana. And even though marijuana advocates want to say that legalization causes no negative effects, cannabis use disorder or addiction is 20% more prevalent in states that have legalized recreational marijuana, and it's 25% more prevalent in our young people. And one of the most common arguments that you'll hear as pastors and church leaders is that God made marijuana, it's natural, and so it's automatically good, it's automatically safe. But unfortunately, we live in a fallen world, and so not everything that's natural is safe. And if you look at this list, you see arsenic, lead, mercury, hydrogen sulfide, radon, asbestos, formaldehyde, anthrax, snake venom. So many things that are natural, but they're not safe. And if you think about plants, oleander, rosary pea, castor bean, and hundreds of others are poisonous, and they're even deadly if ingested. Also, it doesn't matter if a substance is natural or artificial. If it's inhaled as smoke, it's not going to be safe. At least 110 chemicals in cannabis smoke are known to be cancer-causing, damaging to DNA, harmful to unborn babies, and otherwise toxic. And if all else is equal, of course, we're going to go for a natural product. But just because a substance is natural doesn't mean that it's safe. Also, modern high-potency marijuana is not natural. Think about the THC levels and how they've risen over the past 50 years. That didn't happen naturally. And I discuss that at great length in my books. Also, some people say that marijuana has never killed anyone. That's an argument that I hear all the time. Marijuana has never killed anyone, but that's just simply not true. Marijuana can kill through heart attacks, arrhythmias, strokes, cancer, suicide. It can cause problems through motor vehicle accidents, trauma. And cohort studies show us that marijuana users are 2.5 times more likely to die from all causes than their non-using counterparts. And tomorrow I'll be speaking at Parent Action Network, and it's a network, a group of over 1,000 parents. 300 to 400 of them have had kids that have either died, they've been hospitalized, they've been institutionalized because of marijuana. And because I know so many of these parents at this point, there's no way you could ever convince me that marijuana is safe. Let's talk about marijuana's effects on the body. One joint is equivalent to 20 cigarettes when we compare lung cancer risk. And the risk of lung cancer in moderate to heavy smokers is almost 6 times that of a non-marijuana user. Marijuana has potentially deadly effects on the heart, and there are countless studies now that show this. A 2024 systematic review revealed a doubled risk of heart attack among marijuana users compared to non-users. And even more impressive, a 2025 study of over 9 million people aged 50 and younger shows a 6-fold risk of obesity in marijuana smokers, a 6-fold risk of heart attack, and a 7.5-fold risk of dying from a heart attack. A 2025 multi-center study shows a 4 times risk of diabetes among marijuana smokers. Marijuana damages the immune system. It causes reduced fertility, and it is extremely dangerous to unborn babies. And I want to talk just briefly about the genetic effects. This is fascinating. When I was in medical school, I was taught that there was a lot of junk DNA, that we had evolved to the point where a lot of our DNA just wasn't needed anymore. It wasn't being used. But now we know that there is no junk DNA. It's regulatory DNA. It's what we call the epigenetic portion. It's the portion that turns on and off our other genes. And marijuana turns our genes on and off at the wrong time. It does something called methylation, and at least 163 of our genes are methylated or turned on and off at the wrong time if we're marijuana users. Even after abstinence, even after stopping using marijuana for a long period, 129 of our genes are still methylated. They're still turned on or off at the wrong time. And the effects of marijuana, CBD, and other products of cannabis affect the DNA and cause many cancers, congenital anomalies, accelerated aging, heart issues, and much more. And 9 of those genes that I talked about are genes that are intimately associated with autism. So we see the risk of autism today rising, and one of the reasons is because of the rise of marijuana as well. And so this can cause many diseases that we never would have dreamed that it could cause. And this information here is very new. These studies are all within just the past couple of years. And what's really incredible is that epigenetic effects are transgenerational. So these genes are in our gametes. They're in our sperm and in our eggs, and they're passed along to future generations, down to the 4th generation. So when you use marijuana, you're not only affecting yourself, but you're affecting your great-grandchildren. And this lines up perfectly with the Bible. You might remember that Exodus 20:5, Deuteronomy 5:9, Numbers 14:18, and Lamentations 5:7 tell us that the sins of the fathers will be upon the sons to how many generations? The 3rd and the 4th generation. And so some people argue that the Bible accurately predicted these transgenerational effects almost 3,000 years ago. And that epigenetics is just one more reason that we can know that the Word of God is true. So let's move on to the mental health effects of marijuana. Mental illnesses that are linked to marijuana include mood disorders, anxiety disorders, psychosis, personality disorders, and substance use disorders as well. And marijuana's effects on mental health can be long-lasting and even permanent, especially in developing brains. Heavier use leads to more long-lasting effects, but occasional use isn't risk-free. Many studies show that marijuana can lead to an increased risk of psychosis, not only immediately, but much later in life. And a study in JAMA Pediatrics showed that 43% of adolescents who use marijuana reported experiencing at least one psychotic symptom. And cannabis-induced psychosis can lead to long-lasting and permanent psychosis. Almost half of those who have cannabis-induced psychosis will eventually develop either bipolar disorder and or schizophrenia. And this is called conversion. And the risk of conversion is much higher with cannabis than it is with other drugs, such as cocaine, methamphetamines, hallucinogens, and alcohol. Although many people believe that marijuana is much safer than these drugs, there's a lot of ways that these drugs or that marijuana is actually more harmful than these drugs. A 2022 study revealed that there's a 3 times risk of psychosis among all marijuana users compared to non-users, a 4 times risk among frequent users, and a 5 times risk in those with CUD or cannabis use disorder addiction. Another study showed a 4.1 times risk of schizophrenia after just 10 uses over 15 years. So even very infrequent use can cause severe adverse effects. Marijuana legalization leads to more cannabis-induced psychosis. And states that have more liberal laws regarding cannabis have more hospitalizations due to cannabis-induced psychosis. And one of the most common reasons that people use marijuana is because they believe that it will reduce anxiety. But actually, when you come down from it, the opposite is true. You're going to have more anxiety than you would have had you not used at all. And you're going to have more on average than your friends do. There's almost a doubled risk of anxiety disorders among those who smoke high-potency cannabis. And that's all cannabis or all marijuana that's sold today. Regarding mood disorders, marijuana causes depression and bipolar disorder. It's not just associated with it. There are many studies now that show that it actually causes these. And it's not just immediately, but again, for many years and potentially decades down the road. A 2020 study that followed people from approximately age 20 to age 50 found that cannabis use in adolescence leads to a 70% increase in depression in adulthood and a 65% increase in suicidality years to decades down the road. So here again, use as a young person can cause problems many decades later. A 2025 meta-analysis of over 9 million people aged 50 and younger showed a 16-fold increase. This is a brand new study. This is a very recent study. A 16-fold increase in depressive episodes. And this is a meta-analysis. This is looking at many studies. So 16 times risk of having a depressive episode if you use marijuana. Not 16%. Marijuana leads to a greatly increased risk of suicide. A 2023 study revealed a 5 times risk of a suicide attempt among young people who use marijuana less than monthly, a 7 times risk among those who use marijuana monthly to twice a week, and a 9 times risk among those who use 3 times per week or more. And the most prevalent drug found in toxicology screenings among those who have committed suicide is marijuana. The suicide rate among 12 to 25-year-olds is 31% higher in states that have legalized medical marijuana, and it's 71% higher in states that have legalized recreational marijuana. The legalization kills. Many studies show that marijuana leads to personality disorders, and it does this by damaging what's called the prefrontal cortex. And this is dose dependent. The more you use, the worse the issue. And this is normally the last part of our brain to mature. It's the last part of our brain that becomes mature. Usually that's around the age of 26 or so. And it causes many problems with executive function. That's planning, decision-making, problem solving, etc. And this damage also leads to problems with emotional regulation, self-control, and goal setting. And all of this leads to a lack of what we would call wisdom, a lack of motivation. And it leads to violence and crime and relationship problems, family issues, and much more that we hear about in the news and in studies when we read about this with marijuana. And so when we see that person that's 35 or 40 or 50 that's been smoking marijuana for years, and they lack wisdom and they lack maturity, and they have the maturity maybe of a teenager or even a child in some cases. When you see that our society in a lot of ways is in shambles, of course we have to think about the spiritual side of things, but this is just marijuana is just a sinister tool that Satan uses to help further that. So let's talk about the Bible and marijuana. While the Bible doesn't specifically use words like cannabis or marijuana, the Bible does command sobriety. And some people argue that marijuana and alcohol are essentially the same. And since the Bible doesn't ban alcohol for all purposes, it doesn't ban marijuana. But unfortunately, that argument is flawed. The Bible does call drunkenness a sin. And while you can drink alcohol and not be drunk, you can't use marijuana and not be high. And by the way, the difference between being drunk and being high is something that we've made up. Is something in our society. It's not something that's a biblical distinction. Being drunk and being high are just words for not being sober. And so since the Bible commands sobriety, it does address the subject of marijuana. And since a person can't smoke marijuana and not be high, for that reason alone, we must say that the Bible prohibits its use. And there are many other aspects of marijuana that the Bible addresses as well. And I give 6 of those in the expanded edition of Weeding Out the Myths, my first book on that. First, the medical issues that we listed above. Second, marijuana makes you a slave to sin because addiction is slavery. And then the last reason that I'll cover here, again, is God calls us to be sober at all times. So why are we to be sober? Is God just wanting to take away our fun? Well, no. He loves us. He knows what's best for us, and his commands are always for our good. And he wants to deliver us from the deception, the delusion, the depression, the devastation, the destruction, the death brought about by drugs. And the Bible gives at least 9 reasons that drunkenness, that we should avoid drunkenness. And drunkenness leads to poor judgment. It leads to indulgence in sin. It leads to poverty. It leads to loss of spiritual insight. And that's a big one that I see. It leads to attacks of the enemy. And it leads to an opening of the dark side of the spiritual world that we're commanded not to be a part of. As pastors and as church leaders, at some point, you'll deal with this. And again, I talk to pastors all the time whose congregations and families are dealing with this. And some of them are struggling with this themselves and people that really you wouldn't believe. And so I'd be happy to help any of you. I've been able to help them in a lot of cases, and I'd be happy to help anybody here. You can see my email address there. It's been a great privilege and a pleasure to get to speak to you today. Almost everything that I've talked about is in my books. And Weeding Out the Myths is available now. It's available anywhere books are sold, and I have copies of it today. If you want a copy, it's just $10 today. And The Blunt Truth is one that's coming out that I'm a co-author on, and that'll be coming out August 4th. But you can pre-order it today, and if you'll go to barnesandnoble.com, or you can go through drwiggins.com, it actually will help the books to be in bookstores, so I would really appreciate that. I look forward to meeting each of you. If I haven't met you already, thank you so much. God bless you.